It took hours to build this multi-page form. So let me show you how to build multi-page forms in Next.js using server actions, validation with Zod, and then we'll even use React context and local storage to be able to persist data in between page refreshes. So if your user doesn't complete the form in one go and they come back later, they'll still have all that data right there in the same spot. Let's see how to do it. Now what we're gonna build is a slightly simplified version of this form, which is for my platform called Deals for Devs at dealsfordevs.com. And you can put in a bunch of information, and if I say product name, you'll notice as I refresh, this information is still being populated here in between pages and on page refresh. So if I go to the second page and come back, you see that data is still there. Now we're gonna do this by storing this information inside of local storage, which I think is pretty neat and provides a really good developer experience. So you can see in here that all the data for the individual deal gets stored inside of this object that gets stored inside of local storage. We'll also have validation on here. And then we'll even have a feature where if we go and submit the deal on the final page, it'll redirect us back to the original page that has issues and then give us a pop-up to let us know that this was not successful. But if everything is submitted successfully, like so, and we submit, we'll see that that actually gets submitted to and saved to the database. So we're gonna build all the pieces to handle that using layouts and actions, doing validation with Zod, using built-in validation on the front end, using server actions in Next.js. There's gonna be a lot of cool stuff in here and it's gonna be pretty in-depth, but it will be a lot of fun. Now there also is a link to the source code GitHub repository in the description below where you can get the starter code as well as the final code to make sure you have everything you need to follow along and build the same exact thing yourself. So let's take a look at what we're starting out with. So I have a little bit of layout already configured in this new Next.js project, and we can look at this at localhost 3000. So we can go ahead and open up what we have here, and the homepage is not gonna be anything different. What we're gonna have though is this route for /add, and then we're gonna have pages for each one of the different steps. So right now, this just has a button to go to the first page, step 1, and then we'll have step 2, and then we'll have step 3, and then we'll have review. Now, obviously to navigate between these different pages, we're gonna want some sort of navigation bar. So we're gonna build out this side navigation bar that you see here and actually show you how to update the selected tab based on the path of the URL that you're on. So we have a bunch of these files stubbed out. If we take a look really quickly, inside of the app directory, we have the add directory. And this is going to have all of our different steps underneath it. So the add directory has a layout that just has a header here that uses a page header component. And that's what displays this piece up here. And then what we're gonna have is we're gonna have two different things. We're gonna have the side navigation bar that we'll add in a little bit. And then we'll have the children of this route shown in here. Now the children of this route is gonna be the individual forms on each page. You can see an example here and then on these different pages as we go through. So inside of these nested routes, each one has its own page. That's where that form will be. And I have the review form already stubbed out, but there's nothing in it yet. And then inside of the review folder, we also have an actions folder and we have a submit deal action. We also have actions for step 1 form action and so on. So each one of these is going to have its own action. And then we also have those associated components. So review form, step 1 form, step 2 form, step 3 form. Now, the last thing I want to show you is that we have a component for input. And this actually does a lot of different things that we'll talk about as we go along. And we'll also need to hide this context and get rid of this as well. And then get rid of this. This is all stuff that we're going to add as we get through this. But what this input component does is we pass in a few different properties that you would assume for inputs and labels. And then we generate the label. They may also have a description if there's like additional details for that label. We can put that in the description. And then we have our ID, which we also use for the name. We determine, or we have parameters for required, pattern, min length, min, max, etc. So we pass all those messages or those properties down. And then we also have the error message here. Now, I don't know what code that is, but that needs to go away. So that's what we're gonna use to actually build our form. So let's start to look at our step 1 form. And on step 1, we're gonna have two different properties. We're gonna have the name of the deal, and then we're also gonna have a link to the deal. So inside of this container for our different inputs, we're gonna import the input component, if we do this correctly. And then the label for this will be name, the ID will be name, and then we may get some IntelliSense here from GitHub Copilot as we go through, where this is going to be type of text and it's also going to be required. So we can save this and just go see really quickly what this looks like. Let's go to step-1, and then there's our name property. Now, again, we're going to have our side navigation, submit buttons, etc. So we'll get to that. So we have that one, and then we're also going to have another input for our link. So we'll have this be link, and then ID of link. Type is text. This is going to be required as well. Now, the other thing we want for our link is a pattern, a regex pattern for an actual URL. So like any other good developer, I found one on Stack Overflow that I'm going to copy and paste into the code. That'll work for now. And so we'll keep that pattern property so that we can take advantage of built-in HTML validation. So the last thing we'll need is an actual button. So inside of here, we will add a button and then just say submit. And we'll come back and style and see that in a second. So what we should see is this should give us built-in HTML validation. So this is required. This one should also then tell us to fill out the form because it's required, and then also give a message to say we need to match the requested format. So that works well. We don't have a component yet for a submit button. So let's go ahead and create that, and we'll update this submit button to take into account the pending state of the submitted action. So we'll do that eventually. But for now, let's just stub out our submit button. And this is going to take in a property of text. So we'll have our submit button props. And then inside of here, we'll have not all those things, just the text. And so then inside of here, we want to reference that text property. So we'll put the text in here, and we will destructure this inside of our props, get a little IntelliSense there. And that should be button as well. And then I'm going to copy and paste the styles for this button. So I don't want this to be a tutorial on building styles. I want that to be something we don't spend too much time on. So inside of here, we will convert this now to our submit button. And then instead of passing in the submit there, we will pass in the text property of submit. And we'll make sure to get our auto import, or our manual import, I guess, for it, but it does it for us after we trigger it. And then we should have our submit button here, still works the exact same, fill out the form, validation should be working, and then this will actually submit it. Now, obviously for this form, we don't want this to submit as a traditional form post with the form data, or I guess it's get by request. So we'll go in and fix that, but at least we have the layout of our form so far. Now, the other thing I meant to do is to add a description to our URL. So I'll show you what that field looks like. So description is going to say must start with HTTP or HTTPS, just to make sure they know that. And that just adds a little additional context to the label here to make sure the user has everything they need. Now, I did get some feedback from an accessibility perspective where if you add a placeholder in here that shows HTTPS or whatever, that provides a little bit of context, but the problem with placeholders is they go away after we click in there. So we can't see what that reference was. So at least this way, we're able to give them a piece of context that stays with them as they fill out the form. Now, additionally, because this is wrapped inside of the label itself, so this is all still inside of the label, we get the benefit of clicking on either the link text there or the description text, and that will trigger the focus on this actual input. So it's a little more accessible to add some additional context this way and then have it be wrapped inside of the label still as well. All right, so I think that should be good for our form 1. Let's go and do the same type of thing for form 2. So let me go and grab a form 1, and I'm just gonna grab all of this stuff because most of the stuff is gonna be the same as we go through this. Now, one thing I think, so let's open up the step 2 form. Let's replace this in, and then we'll update the properties. Now, one thing I do want to mention though is we're building a simplified version of what's on Deals for Devs. So there are some additional interesting challenges with doing dates and then doing things like upload images in here and having different types of input. So right now we're only doing basically type of text and type of number. There are some additional challenges that come with this final form. So if you want to see more details on how to handle those, let me know in the comments below. But we're addressing most of those things in this video. So let's go and navigate over to step-2, and we will go and add our step navigation bar in a minute. But let's go ahead and get the imports for this input, and then we'll also get the import for this button. And then we just want to change, so the details for step 2, Step 2 is going to be coupon details. So this will be the coupon code, and then we'll have ID of coupon, type of text required still, and then we'll have the discount, and we'll say this is a percentage. We'll say this is discount. This will be type of number. We won't have a description. We won't have a pattern, but we will have a min of 1 and a max of 100. So we want to make sure they're not uploading like a 0% discount, because that would be silly. And then do we need anything else in here? Min, max, and required. So we'll need required as well. Oh, we already have that. So that should be it. And you can see, like, after having this input component, how quickly we can build out additional forms. So almost all this stuff stays the same. We can look at this. This should have built-in validation. So if I press enter on the form, please fill this out, coupon code. Oh, the other thing we want is min length on the coupon code. So min length is going to be 5. And then with that, if we submit, it'll say should be lengthened to 5 characters. Cool. I also will do some future content on client-side validation as well. So if you're interested in that, let me know. If you look at the deals for devs here, we start to type, get rid of it, come back. It also does highlight this and show the error message. In this tutorial, we're just going to show server-side validation and error messages, server-side error messages from validation, and then we have the built-in HTML5 validation. And then on discount, this should be it's required, and then we can't do like 101, and we can't do 0. So if we do this, it's still getting those validation errors, and if we do 100, that should be good, and then that submit. Cool, so that is working well as well. And then we can go into step 3, and let's copy and paste this again. So let's take this, and let us copy in this form. Let's get all of our inputs from the right place. Submit button, and we won't need a pattern here, but what we will have is 2 properties for contact info. So this will be the contact name, and then we'll give appropriate parameters from there. So contact name required, type text yes, and then we'll have the contact email and contact email, and then type of email instead of text. So I mentioned earlier, we're just doing text and number. We're also doing email. We don't need a description. This should be required. The validation for the type of email should take care of that for us. So if we look at now, step 3, this should have validation. So submit, fill in the name, submit, fill in the email. Should be a valid email. So here's mine, submit, good. So now we have these 3 different pages with these forms, and they're laid out pretty well. Let's go ahead and add our navigation bar on the side so that we can navigate with that bar between these different form elements, in addition to the actual submit handler, which will use server actions to do validation and then redirect in a second. But let's first add that side step navigation bar. All right, so let's go back into our layout for the add route. And inside of here, we have our children, but above that, we want to add the step navigation. And then we'll see what starter code is in that. So inside of here, I've got some styles and stuff taken care of for you, but without the actual functionality. So if we look at this, this looks okay. Notice there's no highlighting, but these links actually do work to get to the next pages. And I don't think it makes sense to actually go through and build this part from scratch because it's mostly styling, but let's walk through what's here. We have a little bit of a configuration object for the different steps. So each one has an ID, it has a title or like a label that actually gets displayed. Then we have 2 things that are very similar here. We have the route that it is on, and then we have the link of where it should go. Now, in theory, these could be the same thing, and we actually could kind of refactor this. We're going to refactor these links here in a minute to something that actually uses types. So we'll have strong typings for our route links in a second. So just kind of ignore the fact that this is a little bit of duplicate logic. So we have that. We will track the current step and the current path. And that's what we're going to use to actually do the highlighting of the route that we're currently on. So we'll do that in a second. But inside of here, we have our back button. We have an iteration through our steps. And for each one, we're creating a link with the Next.js link component. So we pass in the href. We pass in a key because it's inside of a loop. And then we have on click right now is calling set current step, which doesn't have any logic there. And then we pass that to the step ID of, or the steps ID. Inside of here, we have our styling. Notice that we are applying classes in here of font bold and text white to the highlighted route, to the title here, based on whether or not the current path equals this step's route. So for each one of these, we need to grab, for each one of our steps, they will have an associated route, which is basically just the end of the path of the page that we're on. If those two things match for a given one, then we're going to highlight that as the current step. Now we also have a mobile dashboard here where if we add or inspect in here and make this smaller, this is going to collapse down and actually have this kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 horizontally, which I think is really cool. So if you want to see a full video on building that thing from scratch, let me know. Happy to do that. But for now, I think it's probably better use of our time to do more on the actual like form building and handling. So let's go ahead and add the logic in here though to handle these the different pages and routes that we're on. So let's figure out how to get the path name or the name of the current path that we're on. We can use a hook from Next.js called use path name, and this will return to us the actual path name. Now from here, Copilot is actually giving us a suggestion where we can take the path name, we can split it based on the slash, and then we can pop off the last item. Now what that means is it's going to split based on the slash to get the different parts, and then the pop is going to take that last item, which is going to be the piece at the end. So that should be our current path. So let's just do a log of this, and let's see if we actually get that logged out correctly. And we're on step 1, and step 1 is highlighted, so that looks like a good thing. You can see it's logging out step 1 over here. If we go to step 2, that looks like it's updating as well. So now we have the ability to check what the current path is, and we're able to get a reference to that inside of our component, and then use that to apply classes to the selected link. Now let's see what to do with this back button here. So as we go through the different steps on the form, we want the back button to go obviously to the previous step. So from review back to step 3 to step 2 to step 1, etc. Now, one thing we should do is actually make this a link in Next.js, because this actually is a link and not really a traditional button. And then we'll have some sort of href in here that we need to come back and update. So where do we actually get this link from? Well, we want to keep track of the current step that we are on, and we're going to keep track of this using use state for the current step, and then we'll have the set current step as well. And this will come from use state. Hopefully we got that import, and then we'll have a default value of 0. Now in here, I originally had IDs for each one of these steps, but I realized we don't actually need them. We can just use the index of the item in the array because we want a 0-based index anyway. So let's go through and get rid of all of these ID properties. All right. And then if I scroll down, I had a couple references to this as well. I was using the ID as the key, but we can use the link instead. And then we can also get the ID that gets displayed inside of the step icon coming from the index that we're on. So we can have a variable I inside of map there for the index, and we can display I plus 1. All right, so let's add something to our link tag up here. Actually, this should be capital link. Did we not do that correctly earlier? Maybe we didn't. And then let's just add something in here. So let's go and just see that this looks the exact same. So all of this should look the exact same, but now our back button is not yet dynamic. It's just hard coded to a link that doesn't work. So let's see how to reference that. Now, if we think about this, if we're on a step that's not the first step, we want to link back to the previous step. If we're on the first step, we want to link back to itself, basically, or we could get rid of the link or whatever we wanted to do, however you wanted to handle that. But the main thing is we want to get a reference to the step at the current step minus 1. And then if that thing is there, we'll use the link, or we'll use the link from the steps of 0.link. All right, so let's talk through this one more time. We want to grab the current step from our steps array based on the current step here. And then we want to reference its link property. And if we're on the first element, meaning current step minus 1 does not exist, then we just want to use the link for the current or for the first step. Now, the one thing we need to keep in mind though, is we need to be able to update this current step anytime the current path changes. So we can do this using a use effect. And inside of here, we'll have our callback function, and we'll update this only when the current path changes. And then we need to calculate what that step is. And we'll say our step is going to be from our steps array. We want to find the index. And then inside of here, we'll have a reference to the individual step. And then how do we compare to see if we are matching the right object? Well, we want to compare the route of the step to the current path that we're on. So again, inside of the steps array, we called find index, which iterates over every item in that array, so each step. And then we're passing some sort of condition to determine whether or not this is the item that we're looking for, and it returns back that index to us. And then from here, we can set our current step to the step that we just got. All right, so now let's go and test this out. So let's start on a review, and let's go and hover, and it looks like it's got the link to step 3. So we go back and we go back and we go back. And if we go back again, we should just kind of stay on the same page. And that seems to work really well. It doesn't look like it even does like a page refresh, which is good. So we can just kind of use the current or the route, the path for the first route as our default, which works out really well. Now, the other thing we could do is inside of our link is we could add a prefetch of true for this as well. And then I think below we had this set to false, but we could do a prefetch of true. This will go ahead and kind of fetch the information for those next steps. In theory, this will make those even faster. And then same thing for the back button, even though a lot of that information is probably already there anyway. So this multi-page form is starting to look pretty good, but now we need to actually work on handling these form submissions. So let's close out all the code that we have open, and let's just start with one of the actions. So let's start with our step 1 action. Now inside of our action, we're actually going to use form state with Next.js. And what this allows us to do is to define an action. And then by using use form state, where is this? If we look in the Next.js docs under server-side validation and error handling, they show you an example of an action. And then one of the things that I think stands out to me is they end up using inside of the client component the use form state. And what happens is you pass it an initial state of some sort, then you pass it your action, and it returns to you the state and then a wrapper around your form action that you get to set as the action for that form. Now that may seem like a lot, but we'll talk about that in a second. And the benefit of that is we have a really nice and concise way to do server-side validation or to get feedback from the server. And it actually works in a progressively enhanced way, which is pretty cool. So inside of our actions file, each one of these is annotated with use server to make sure that this file is only run on the server. As you can imagine, that's a big deal because we don't want to let any sensitive non-server side code be used in the client. I have a types file in here, and we're going to define one type in here, which is for form errors. And form errors is going to be an object where we have keys that are strings, and then we have values that are strings or undefined. Basically, we're going to use this as a mapping for the errors that come back, validation errors from our code. So we want to be able to use that inside of our action to return the state back to the user. So the way we define an action when we use useForm state is we have our previous state, and that previous state in this case is going to be form errors. We're actually going to say this could be form errors or undefined because we may redirect and not return anything if the state is successful. And then we'll have the form data, which is the actual properties that got submitted from the form. So this will be a of type form data. So those are the two parameters that we have. In theory, what we need to return at the end of this is either a redirect or the form errors. Now from this form, we need to get those individual inputs, and then we need to use Zod to actually be able to validate that. Now, if you look back into the documentation for Next.js, they're using Zod. They have schemas defined for the different form, or for this in particular form. And then they have specific error messages inside of here as well. So we need to actually create those schemas, and we'll create a couple of these and then maybe just copy and paste in a few from there. So we want to have not only a schema for the entire object that we're building in the multi-page form, we also want to have individual schemas for the individual form pages. So an example of that could be step 1 schema. And this is going to be, we're going to reference Z from Zod. So I've already installed the Zod package. We're going to define this as an object, and it's going to have a couple of different properties. This didn't really get exactly what I wanted, so we'll do something in here a little bit more specific. So inside of here, we have a name property with which is a string. And then we set the min to be 2 to say, hey, they at least have to input 2 characters. And then we're able to customize this validation message like so. So we have our name, then we have a link, and we can say this is going to be a string that also is a URL. And then we can just auto-populate this custom message here that says links must be a valid URL. Now we'll also have our step 2 schema. This will also be a Zod object. And then inside of here, they're not guessing the right thing, which is fine. We'll have our coupon, and our coupon is going to be a string. We want to give it a min as well. This is kind of arbitrary, so we could say we want this to be 5 if we wanted, and finish that. And then we'll also have our discount, which is going to be not a number directly, but we want to coerce the input to a number. So we'll coerce this number, or coerce this input to a number. Then we'll have a min of not 0, but 1. Discount must be greater than 0. And then we'll have a max of 100, and discount must be less than 100. And then we can close out this object. So again, because the form data inputs are strings, we want to convert that string to a number, and then we define our min and max there as well. Now from here, I'm just going to copy in the step 3 schema. And step 3 is going to have a contact name, which is a string, minimum of 5 characters, contact email, which is a string, which is an email. And then one thing we should do is make sure that our step 1 form, for example, we have required on the name, but we don't have the minimum of 2. So just to make sure that these things are kind of matching up, we can set the min of 2 here. And then inside of our coupon in form 2 to form, we should see this has a min length of 5, so that matches the schema. And then lastly, we added a min of 5 for the contact name in step 3 form, so 3 form. And so inside of contact name, we should have a min length of 5 as well. So I think those should be matching up now. And so we have our individual schemas. One thing that we will want, though, is an overall schema for the entire data that we're submitting. So we can do this by saying we're going to create a new deal schema, and this is going to be z.object. And then I want to just reference those schemas above. So GitHub Copilot has it for me. We can spread out step 1 schema.shape. And so basically what this is going to do is build a whole schema for the entire deal based on the schemas that we've already defined up above. Now, a couple of other things that we might want to do, we might want to create a type of new deal, and then we can use z.infer to generate that for us. So Copilot's got this done for us, where we're going to have a new deal. This is going to create a TypeScript type, and that's based on inferring the schema from our new deal schema. Pretty cool. So that means inside of action 1, we can come back and actually use that schema to do some validation. So one of the things we can do that's a little hacky but does work is we can say object.from entries and then form data.entries. And what that's going to do is take all the items inside of our form data and convert that into an object. And that's going to represent our validated data. And then we can take our validated data, or our unvalidated data, and we can say validated is going to come from our step 1 schema and get that import. And then we can call safe parse and then pass in the data. So with Zod, we're going to pass in the object from the form. We're going to do a safe parse, which means it's not going to throw an error. It's going to return back an object that either has an error. Let's actually see, validated dot. It's either going to have data or an error message, and we'll have a Boolean for success or not. So let's say if we didn't get back success. Now Copilot just auto-completed this by returning back the Zod errors, but I don't like the form that Zod errors come in. They don't match exactly what we're looking for in terms of key value pair, which matches this form errors. So let's actually do one thing. Let's log out the validated, and let's log out the validated.error.errors, because I just want to see, I want to show you what this looks like and why I'm changing this a little bit. So let's take that, and then we'll return that back. Otherwise, for right now, we won't return anything. So let's go back into our step 1 form. And this is where we need to set up the use form state to generate that action for us. So we'll call the use form state hook. We'll pass in an initial state. And that initial state is basically just going to be an empty object because we're not going to have any errors that we're starting with. We could also create this as a separate variable over here, and we could say const initial state, and then set this to an empty object. We could also say this is going to be of type form errors. So that's that string to error message string type. And then we could set the initial state in here that way. That way we're specifically referencing those types. And then what we'll have is we'll have our, the first parameter is actually not the initial state, but it is the action that we just created. So this is the step 1 form action. Did we not export? There we go. So there's the import from the actions. And we're getting an error in here. We'll come back to that in a second. But from that use form state, we're going to destructure 2 properties. And those 2 properties that it returns back to us are the form action that it has wrapped itself around, and then the actual state that comes back. So I'm going to call that state inside of this component server errors. Could be server state, but since we're putting the errors right on that object, we'll just call it server errors. And then we'll have the actual form, and then we'll have the actual form action come back. And this is what we're going to set to the form. So we'll set that to our form action. And I think what we're missing in here is the return type. So this is going to return back an object of form errors, or it's going to return back undefined. And to fulfill that for now, we can just return back an empty object to make that definition work with what is there. But what I want to show you is what these errors looks like and why we'll format those into a different format. All right, so with that in place, let's go back to our step 1 form, and let's just move one of these requireds. So we kind of have to bypass the built-in HTML validation that we added to be able to trigger these validation error messages. So let us submit step 1, and we actually have to fill out the other one that does have the HTML validation. And then what we should see is inside of here, we'll see this log of all the things, all the issues that were there. So this is what an error looks like by default. And so what I want to do is just have a simple mapping of name. So in this case, actually name. So the key of the item that we're looking at, and then its associated error message. And so what I did was end up writing a little bit of code that gets reused in all of these to be able to iterate through all of these Zod errors and convert those to the thing that I'm looking for. So let's create an errors object. And then what we want to do is iterate through the error.errors actually it's error.issues, and then call reduce. And then inside of a reduce function, we're going to have an accumulator, which is of type form errors. And then we'll have the individual issue that we're working with. And then inside of here, what do we want to return? Well, we want to update the initial object. Yeah, we want to pass that initial object in here. So this is the accumulator. So we start with an empty object. And then as we iterate through this thing, we want to return the accumulator each time, but we want to go and update the accumulator with the appropriate message. And I think Copilot has it here where we want to take the key, which is basically the path property of the issue, the first path property. And then we want to set the value to the actual message. And then we return the accumulator. So we start with an empty object. We iterate through each one of the Zod issues. We get the associated message. We get the path name of that property. We use that as a key in our accumulator. We set the value, which is a string, to the message. Then we return the accumulator. And then at the end of this, we are going to return errors. All right. So what should happen now is basically nothing. We don't see anything happen. So we need to go back in now and look at our step 1 form and look at our server errors. And now we can pass in for each one of our inputs the error message property. So this is a parameter that input already takes. And then the error message we want to get from server errors. So if we have any, we want to reference the one at the name property. So I'm going to copy this. We'll do the same thing for the link. And then hopefully now that actually just goes ahead and shows up, which is nice, but let's just refresh to make sure. So let us submit a correct link. Let's submit, and that actually makes the fetch request to the backend and then comes back and gives us this feedback here. Now, I don't know if I didn't update the input. This should also add a border. I think I maybe forgot to come back and add this. So inside of here, we should conditionally, let's update this. So let's make this a template literal string. And let's say if we have an error message, let's do a question mark, and then we'll add a border red and a border slate, and then the border property, and we'll do this a border 2. So what we're saying is, we just need one of these. So what we're saying is if there is an error message for this, not only do we show the error message, we also then add a border around that input. So we get a pretty good visual indicator of like this thing actually has something wrong with it. So we can submit, this is making that request back and forth, and it's gonna show us that server validation message, which is pretty cool. Now I'm not using like React hook form or anything like that in this video. The reason is that HTML validation built-in stuff can take care of almost all the validation for us. So we could layer on top like client-side validation and combine that with server errors. I'm actually gonna work on a video that shows you how to do all of that in the future. But for now, we're just gonna take these server errors and display them appropriately. Now, just to see if this is going to work with the other input, let's get rid of the pattern here. Let's actually just get rid of the pattern. Let's try that. So if we submit, this should require this, but if I fill it out, it doesn't have the pattern on the front end, but the back end will catch it. And it says link must be a valid URL. So that actually works pretty well. Let's go back and add all of these properties. So now if we refresh, we try to submit, HTML validation takes over in all cases, and then we get a good submission at the end. Cool. So the question is, what do we want to do inside of our action when we actually have something that works? Well, let's do a redirect to the next step. And so I'm going to go into the types, and I'm going to copy in a type that I created. And this is an enum for the add deal routes. Now I'm a fan of enums. There's debate about this. You can go watch a video I did on why I like them versus other ideas. But I have this enum for add deal routes. And then what we want to do is say like, if we get in a success state, well, we just want to redirect to the next page. And so we can import redirect from next navigation. Oh, I didn't get the right thing. Redirect from next navigation. And then we're going to redirect to add deal routes dot. And then in this case, we're going to go from the first page to coupon details. And that should do it for us. So that should actually navigate us over to the next page. So let's click submit. And then we get to the next page, which is great. Now, the cool thing is, we can copy all of this code, and let's go into actions and step 2, and let's put this in here. And really, we need to update our annotations for this as well. So let's go and get that and get our imports in here. And this is going to be the step 2 schema. And then we're going to redirect. If we get all of these imports, next navigation and our types, we're going to redirect not to coupon details, but contact info. Cool. So that code looks almost the exact same. We could abstract this into something more generic. That's fine. We don't have to worry about that now. And then we'll go into our step 2 form, and let's just copy some stuff from step 1. So we'll copy all of this into step 2. Then we'll have our initial state, form errors, and then let's get in all of our imports, and then let's set the action on this to be the form action. And then, just like we did with the other inputs, we can set the error message to be server errors dot coupon. Got to make sure Copilot's doing the right thing. And then this one will be discount. So let's say we get rid of our required on discount. Let's go in here and submit. Okay, maybe we missed something there, not sure. Did we save this? Yes. We're calling the action. Yes. Oh, this is step 2. Step 2, form action. So we need to make sure we get the right one there. Okay. So now if we submit, we should get back the validation message here. Looks like we have a mismatch of maybe the name we've got mismatched here. So let's check that. So inside of here, we've got the ID of coupon, and let's make sure in our schema, this is coupon as well. Looks like it is. Oh, it must be 5 characters long. So did we, something about that's not being passed over. Because we said code. I don't know when we did that. I think Copilot might have done that. I'm not sure. So let us refresh again or submit. So that's good. And then discount must be greater than 0. Cool. So we'll do 10 and submit, and that redirected to the right page. So that looks like it worked. Awesome. And now we do the same thing or very similar for step 3. So let's go into here and let's do step 3 form, and let's get the action stuff set up. So this will be step 3 form action. We'll import form state. We'll have our initial state is going to be form errors. We'll import that. There we go. Initial state. Okay, so now we need to go into step 3 action, and then we can copy and paste code from step 1 and 2. So we will just copy all of this. And you can see kind of like as you get in a flow and kind of figure out what you're doing, you can then build the next things pretty fast. So we want to reference the step 3 form action. Not the form action, but the step 3 schema. Yes. And then the last thing is we'll redirect to review deal and make sure we get our import for both of these. Cool. So that should be good. Let's go into our step 3 form. Let's remove like min length requirement on the contact name, and it won't let us submit nothing. So let's do that, and then this, and then enter. That actually did seem to work, which isn't good. So let's make sure that we had that correct. Oh, we didn't set our action. So actions should be set to that form action. I think this workflow, by the way, with like the server state and being able to use that on your page is really, really sweet. So, so let's try to submit, fill out the form. Yes, there's something there. And then this should come back. It should come back with an error on contact name. And it looks, oh, we didn't actually give it our error messages, obviously. Let's do a multi-cursor and come in here and say error message. And then we'll set it to server errors dot and close it out. And then we'll need to update the name. So contact email, and then contact name. And cool, we see that. Please enter contact name at least 5 characters long and submit. That goes to review, which is awesome. And our back navigation works. We aren't persisting data yet. We'll get to that in the next step. But we can actually submit this stuff and get to the next page. Now, the really cool thing is this should also, if we disable JavaScript, this should also work. So we have our built-in validation. Do we still have the required or the min? Okay, so the min is still missing. So let's do this and this. So we still have validation with built-in validation and submit. And we get back our contact name, error, and then the contact email disappears. Now, one thing I want to do in the future is, in a future video I have, is I'll cover how to submit back the original form data and then use that as a default value in your form so that you actually don't lose that state. But at least now this is able to submit without JavaScript enabled, and we can see this here because this will go to the next page. That's really cool to take advantage of with actions. So we've done a ton already. Now we need to actually keep track of all this stuff. We're going to use context in React. We're going to write this stuff to local storage so it's still here in between pages. After we get that, then we'll handle the final submission and review. I guess to show, well, yeah, we'll update the review component to show that in a second once we actually maintain state between those first 3. All right, now let's start to work on our context. And I always kind of, I have to always look up how to create a context and a provider appropriately. So I'm going to look and kind of make sure I'm doing the right thing. But we'll talk about what we're building together. So let's do export const, and then we'll have an add deal context. And this is going to come from creating a context. And then we'll add a type to this in a second. And then we'll just initialize this with null. So the type that we want to create here, let's do a type of add deal context type. And we want to have a few different things inside of here. We want to have new deal data. Now this is going to come from our, it would come from our new deal type, which comes from our schema file. We'll talk about why that won't quite work in a second. But then we'll have an update function. So update new deal details, could be data, I think. And what this is going to do is we're going to pass in deal details, but we're not passing in the entire new deal. We want to pass in a partial. So if you think about, each page only has 2 properties of the entire deal. So in this case, we're going to actually use a partial in TypeScript, and we're going to do a partial of the new deal. And then this will return a void. And let's just close out this. And then the last thing we're going to have in this context, or actually 2 more things, we'll have a data loaded property. I don't know that we actually ended up using this, so we may not, but a data loaded property to say that we've loaded the stuff from local storage. And then lastly, we'll have a reset local storage function, which is going to reset local storage. So as we save things in local storage, we want to wipe that out after the form has been submitted successfully. So we'll use this as our type in here, add deal context type, and we'll just say this can be null as well. Now create context is going to come from, I wonder what VM is there. Is going to come from React. So we have our context defined, we have a context type defined, and this is basically going to be what are the things that we're passing into the provider as the value. Now, Copilot's giving me a lot of things. Let me actually kind of take my time a bit with this. We'll create the add deal context provider, and this is going to take in children, which is a React node. And yeah, I'll take a little bit of help from Copilot there. And then we'll have a few different things, but the main thing we want to have inside of here is we want to return basically what it's showing here, where we have the add deal context dot provider, and the value is going to be something, and then we want to pass in the children here. So now we need to work on this value thing. And we also need to close out our children. So our value thing is missing. We're not passing the right things into it, which are these things. So what we're going to need to keep track of is a few pieces of state. And we will do that using use state. So we'll have our new deal data, and then we'll have our set new deal data, and we'll reference our use state. We'll say this is of type new deal. We'll actually have to update this in a minute. And then what we'll set this to is going to be a default data object. And I'm just going to copy that one over, so I don't have to do this over and over again. But I'm going to have to change something in a second. And this may be a good time to go ahead and introduce this. So in the final code, the default deal has these properties that you've already seen, but it references a type called new deal initial values type. And the reason is when we look at parsing data out of local storage, we want to validate the data coming out of local storage, and we want to validate that not as the thing that we're finally submitting, but just making sure that it has the properties that we're looking for, which are these. And that means that the things that are stored in local storage, we could have an empty value for, or empty string for name, link, coupon, discount, blah, blah, blah. We don't need it to match all those additional requirements. And that's why we create the initial values type. So let's go into our schema. This is probably a good time to go ahead and introduce this. I haven't found a better way to do it. I'm going to copy in a couple of things. We're basically going to replicate all the stuff we did before, but make all of these fields optional. And again, that's because we just want to validate that the object we parse from local storage has these properties, but we don't need them to be anything because it's not being submitted to the actual database yet. And then we're going to generate that type, new deal initial values type, I think is what we wanted. And we're going to generate that based on this. So we're having to write a whole nother schema here, but it is for a specific purpose. And let's go ahead and import this from schemas. We'll also, let's see, we'll also say that new deal data is going to be that type of new deal initial values type. And this one will be the same thing. All right. And then default data, default deal. Okay. So again, this is particularly useful because we want to differentiate between what's validated coming out of local storage and what's validated to actually be submitted to the server. So we can add our new deal data inside of here. And I guess we need to add this as an object. So we'll have new deal data that way. Cool. And if we look inside of here, we have new deal data. Then we have an update const update new or update new deal details. This is going to be a function that takes in a partial. And then we could probably just take this where we're going to take the setter for our new deal data. We're going to take the previous value. We're going to spread out the previous value and then just spread out on top of that any of the new details that have changed. So these new details will override any of the ones that were already there. So then we can pass in the update new deal details. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to call this function every time any of our inputs changes. And that way it's going to have like one place that it handles all these updates, and will also handle writing to local storage there as well. All right, so we have two of those four properties. We also want to have a Boolean for data loaded. And I don't think I end up using this in this example, although I do in the other. But we'll set that initially to a use state of false, and then we'll pass this in here. So if you wanted to make sure for some reason you're doing some sort of additional time for loading data, and you want to make sure that all this data has been loaded from local storage before doing anything in the form, you could use this property. Although again, I think we're not going to end up using that here. And then the last thing we want to do is actually have a reset local storage. And this is going to be a function. It doesn't take any parameters, but it's going to call. It's actually going to, maybe we should rename this to something else. Reset, maybe we should do reset data. Maybe that would be better actually. So let's actually rename this. I think we can do that on the fly. Let's say reset data. And this is going to do two things. We'll pass it into here. That should satisfy our context, but we're going to reset our deal data to be default. And then we're going to do local store, nope, not location, local storage dot set item. And we're going to set that to a stringified version of the new deal. Now, one of the things I like to do is move this into a hard-coded string that we can reference. So we can have our const local storage key is going to be that, and we can prefix this with I don't know, multi-page form demo new deal data, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But we'll use that as a key so we don't have to hard code that every time. So we'll do our local storage key. Cool. Okay, so this creates the provider. It creates the context things that we need for that value, where we have our new deal data, have a Boolean for whether or not it's loaded. We have a function we can call to update new details. We have a function that we can call to reset data. Now, unfortunately, we still have a little bit of work to do now. We can start to look at how do we read the data from local storage. And we're going to do that using a use effect. And this is going to take an empty array as the, let's get the import here. Empty array as the dependency array, meaning we're only going to run this function once. And then what we're going to do is we're going to read from local storage. We have to create that function. And then we're going to set loaded to true. All right, so we will create that function, read from local storage, and let it autocomplete just a little bit. And let's just start to do it. We'll get our data from local storage.get with that key. And then we want to make sure that we validate that thing. So let's say if we don't get back any data, if we don't get back any data, let's set new deal data to the default deal, and let's return that so we can kind of short circuit. If we do get data back, we want to validate that with that schema that we created for the initial inputs. So we can do this just like we did inside of our actions, where we're going to take the new deal initial value schema. I don't know what the best way to name that is, but we're going to call safe parse, and we're going to parse out a JSON parsed version of that data string. And then I called this data string in here. I like to do that to indicate that this is a string and not a data object yet. So we'll then check our success. If validated.success, we will set new deal data to that data. And this data property is on the validated thing. So that's the actual validated data, which is what we'll use here. So we'll set that. And then otherwise, we will just set it to the default deal. So if there's any issue with any of the data being pulled from local storage, we'll just reset everything. So in case we like save some stuff and then a user goes in and hard codes like incorrect JSON string or something, we'll do that. So let's log out validated here. And let's go into our layout for add. And then around our children, we're going to have to add the container for that context provider that we just created. So this is going to be the add deal context provider, and we will wrap that around our children. All right, was there an error in here that we missed? Default deal, use state. So we did not mark this as a use client component. So very common that this happens. You've probably already had this issue. So we need to mark this as use client. Can we now refresh this page? It looks like yes. And then this should trigger the read from local storage. And then did we get anything? No, we didn't. And that makes sense because there is no data string yet. So if we look in here, we haven't actually created this thing. Let's clear this out. Reading local storage. Let's make sure that is triggering, which it is not. Interesting. So we have wrapped this inside of our layout for the add page, and we've wrapped the children inside of it, which should give access to everything. And that should then run this logic. And if I use effect first time. Oh, you know what? You may have caught this. Don't disable JavaScript and then forget to do it the next time. Okay. Wow. So now we have this, and it looks like we're getting back success and data. And I think that's because I had filled this out before, which is fine. But one of the things that we can show is one of the things we want to do is actually have a write to local storage as well. So we can have a write to local storage. And this is going to just take the new deal data and basically just set that item inside of local storage. Let me make sure there's nothing else that I'm missing in here. Reset local storage, save to local storage. So set item. Yeah, it should be the same thing. So what we want to do is every time we call update new details, we also want to go ahead and write that to local storage. It's actually kind of brilliant. So what we'll do is we'll add another use effect up top, use effect. And then we will, inside of here, have a dependency array where basically we're saying anytime the new deal data changes or the data loaded changes, we want to look at writing this stuff to local storage. But we only want to do this if the initial data has been loaded. So if that initial data has been loaded, we can call write to local storage. Now it's telling me in here we need to add the write to local storage as a dependency in the dependency array. And then it's saying that we're trying to reference it before it's been created. So let's go and define this above the use effect. So in here, And then it's going to tell us that this is going to change on every render. So because this function gets called every time our new deal data changes, and this function references new deal data, it's going to continue. That function is then going to change, which means it's going to continue to fall in cycles. So instead of using just a raw function, we can use callback and import that, and then wrap this function in use callback and say that this only needs to update when new deal data changes. That way, this function will stay the same unless the new deal data changes, and that will allow us to actually write this stuff to local storage. So what we should see, if we come into our application and make local storage a little bit bigger and get rid of this first thing, if we just get rid of that local storage, we should see that this was recreated for us with default values. So that works. And then now what we need to do is to be able to track all of this stuff is we can add an on-change handler inside of our input to be able to call the update deal details. So this is going to be inside of this component. We're going to use the context. So use add deal context. And this should have been defined. Oh, this is actually something we forgot to do. Sorry. So inside of our context, at the end of this, we want to create the use effect for this. So what this is going to look like is we're going to export a function called use add deal context, cool, which uses the use context from React and then returns that context. Cool. So that got most of that for us. And then here we can import this. Cool. And then what we'll do is we'll destructure the properties that we need. So we want to destructure a couple of things. We want to destructure the update new deal details function, and then we'll get the new deal data as well. So inside of here, we'll call the on change, and then on change, what we want to do is call a handle input change function. We'll define that above. So const handle input change, and we'll take the autocomplete here. And this is going to be an event for a change on an HTML input element. And then what we want to do is we want to call update new deal details, and then I'll let this autocomplete. What we're doing is we're passing in an object with key value pairs, or with one key value pair for the input that actually changed. So we get the name of that, we use that as the key in the object, we get its target value and use that as the value associated with the key, which passes in as a partial because it's just one property of 8.6. We pass it in as a partial, and then that gets passed into this update deal function, which should then update things accordingly. The one other thing we're missing is we need to take that new deal data and we need to set that as the default value. Yeah, do it like this. And so we'll take the ID of that data. We will grab the value associated with that ID and use that as the default value here. All right, so I just deleted the local storage. Let's refresh. Let's see that this gets created with default values. Great. And then we'll say product name. Notice this is updating in real time. We'll have submit still works. Validation works. Validation works there. Validation works there. Notice this is updating the local storage. We can press submit. This goes to the next page. If we go back to the page, it's still there. If we refresh, it's still there. So we go back to the next page and say coupon and 10%, submit, go to page 3. Contact info is this. Yes, and then submit. And that will take us to the review where we can do our final step in here. So let's look at the review form, and I'm going to actually copy this one in, or at least the form part. So I'm going to grab this, let's see, this part, and let's just paste this in. All right. And what this is we basically just we're using a form so that we can use a button to click to do submit. And then what we're doing is getting all the data from the use new. So we'll use the use add deal context to get the new deal data. And then from there, we can destructure the name, the link, the coupon, the discount, the contact name, contact email from new deal data. So that should populate these values down here. Now, all of these are just kind of showing, they're just kind of displaying the data. So nothing much there. We need to import for our submit button. We can then define our handle form submit. And this is actually going to be an action. So actually the parameters are going to look like this. We'll get the form data. And then here we want to do a couple things. We want to submit to action, show feedback to user, navigate to appropriate page. So there's a couple things in there that we need to do. So let's go into the review action. And inside of here, we have our submit deal action. And inside of here, we're going to take in a deal, which is of a new deal type. All right. And then what do we want to actually do with this? Well, we want to be able to validate the data based on the individual pages. So basically, like if we have an issue in the first page, we want to redirect the user back to the first page. If we have an issue in the second page, etc. So we can we can kind of do like our validation pieces, but we'll do it one at a time. So we'll say step 1 validated, and then we'll take our step 1 schema and parse the deal, and then we'll import this. And then we'll take this and say, if this is not valid, so step 1 validated dot success. If that's the case, then what do we want to do? We want to return, and we want to have a redirect, and we can use our routes again. So add deal routes, and then product info. And then we'll also include an error message, which is like, please validate product info. All right. And we'll kind of define this as a return type. So we're either going to return, and this will be a promise of the submit deal action return type. This doesn't really need to be that specific, but we can create this there, and then we can have a success, do message or Boolean. Yeah, just success Boolean. Cool. And all those are optional. So we'll do that, and then we'll just kind of copy and paste this for step 2. So we'll do step 2 validated, update this, and we're passing in the same deal. And the reason that's okay is because the parsing part will only take the properties that apply to that schema. So it actually will work out fine to just do the same thing. And then in this case, we'll navigate to coupon details, and then we'll say coupon details. And then we'll do this again for part 3 and do part 3 schema. And then check here and go back to contact info and say, please validate contact info. And let's get the imports for both of those. And so now if we get to the bottom of this entire thing, we want to return an object with success of true, a redirect. And in this case, I'm going to redirect to add deal routes dot, and then we'll just do to product info. So basically to like restart the thing. And that's the thing that will return. So inside of our form submit, we will call the submit deal action. We'll pass in the new deal data. We'll get back success, error message, and redirect. And we have an interesting problem here. This also needs to be awaited because it's async. And so we'll do that, or returns a promise. We type correctly. I didn't type any of these correctly. Wow, what a mess. Error message, success, redirect, cool. We have one issue where our new deal data is of the type of initial data stuff. Remember, because we had to use it to validate. So we can actually just say now we're going to pass this in as if it's a new deal. And then we'll import that. So that should work. And then we just kind of go down the line. So if success, we can do something. If else if error message, we can show the error message. Else we can redirect to the route that we just got. So we can do a router, and this I always have to double check where this comes from. So this is from use router. So use router for, and these get mixed up. So next navigation, and that will give us the router. And then we can do a router dot push of the redirect. Cool. So this will actually not be else, it will be a separate if. So if there is a redirect, we will redirect. Now I have already installed React Hot Toast, I believe. Maybe I didn't. No, I didn't. So let's actually do that. So npm install React Hot Toast. This is actually pretty nice to be able to add just toast alerts really easily. And let's see what this looks like. So we need to import this from the toaster. So we'll import the toaster from React Hot Toast. Yes. And then we just throw this in here somewhere. So we'll say toaster like that. So we've added in our toaster, and then inside of here, we can do toaster or toast import dot success, and then we'll just give it the success. Oh, we didn't pass the success message, so that was fine. Deal submitted successfully, yes. Otherwise, we'll do toast dot error and pass in the error message that we did define. Whew. All right, so let's get rid of these comments here. And let's make sure to restart. And then we see our form. We can go to next page, next page, next page. There's our preview of the data. And if I don't know if we'll see, we shouldn't see anything in here. This should just redirect back to the home page, I think, if it's successful. Which maybe it was not. Did we see anything on the server? And did we pass this as the action handle form submit? And this is a use client. So let's just log in, submitting. Let's just make sure we see that. Okay, I don't know. I needed a page refresh for whatever reason originally. And that seems to work. The last thing in here, well, let's make sure, let's just cheat. Let's get rid of product name, and instead of going from here, let's just go to the last page. And then what should happen is this should take you back, and then take you back to the page and say revalidate that specific part. So if I say product name, and then we go to the second page and get rid of the coupon, and then go here, it should say validate coupon details. Cool, that works. The one additional thing that we added inside of Deals for Devs, and this is a little hacky, I don't love it, is because we're doing client-side validation as well, we're able to do this thing where it not only redirects back to the same page, but it also blurs all the items because we're doing client-side validation, and then shows the ones that specifically have the issues. So if I add a product name, not only does it go away there, but if I submit, it takes me back and it's still there, is valid, and then shows the rest of these as invalid. So we don't quite have that here, but what I did was pass in a property as we redirect, query parameter of validate true, which is basically just a flag that says like immediately validate this data on the client and show all the errors associated with it. So I think that is a really nice touch, but we didn't do that in this one. We just navigated to the page that we need. So we can say coupon, enter, enter, and then submit. It should take us back to the home page. The last thing we'll do is on success is call reset data. Is that what we called it? And that's going to come from here, reset data. And then what that should do is if we go to the last page and we submit, it should come back here. And if we look inside of our local storage, it just wiped it out. No, it's here. Okay, so it just has the empty data, which will now be updated. James product, and validation is still working there. Coupon, 10%, submit, contact name, James, email, submit, and then that will get wiped out after we submit successfully. So super cool stuff. This has been one of my longest tutorials of all time. I think that's not like a full course. So hopefully that was a good thing. I do want to give a shout out. We're not going to actually move into the database part of this, but I do want to give a shout out to Zeta, who has been one of my partners now for over a year. And this is what we're using in Deals for Devs. I can actually show you the database for this. If we look inside of this for Deals for Devs, Zeta runs Postgres behind the scenes. And if we look in the deal table, this is the stuff that gets submitted from that form. And actually, this is the one that I created as dummy data, which I should delete, that I created as dummy data at the start of this to show you how this form works. So this is all the data for Deals for Devs. It's pretty cool. And you can go and submit deals if you come across them and check it out as well. So you can see I've got dummy data that's cached in here from local storage. So same exact workflow. There's a few additional details. If you have any additional questions on specific details you'd like to see in a future video, let me know. I'm also working on one individual video that shows like several different ways to handle form validation client and server and to handle interacting with actions. So that'll be a lot of fun. Let me know if you have any questions that you'd like to see covered in that. Hopefully you enjoyed this really long tutorial, longest one I've done in maybe ever, very long time, but I thought it was one that I spent so much time working on this multi-page form with the help of, want to make sure I call out Chris Wicks in the community who did a lot of this work. Anyway, so much work went into it. I thought you would benefit from it. So hopefully you did. Let me know what you think in the comments below. In the meantime, I'll catch you in the next video.